Click by John Theo Jr. Click. The sound reminded Jack of the most important tennis match he never played. He had just parked his Jeep outside the town tennis courts. A few cars down from him, a woman was trying to start an old station wagon, but all it kept doing was clicking. It took Jack a minute to realize he knew her. It had been at least a year since he first met Addison. Even then, it was only a brief introduction at a friend's house. He watched her slam a fist down on the dashboard after another attempt to start her car failed. Jack grabbed his tennis racket and walked over toward Addison with a raised hand to get her attention. "Hold up, you're going to kill your battery." "This thing's a piece of junk," she huffed, not bothering to look up to see who was talking to her. "Addison, right?" he said, leaning down to her open window. "Yeah," she replied, clearly not wanting to talk to a stranger. She finally looked up and squinted as if she were trying to place his face. "Jack," she said, relaxing a bit. "We met at Jill's cookout last year," he cut in, trying not to stare at her hazy green eyes and dimpled bright smile. "Right," she nodded. "You were dating Sue. How is she?" "She's happily married with a baby on the way," he said. Addison brushed her brown hair behind her ear. "Oh, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It was really for the best," he said, waving her comment away. "What's going on with your car? Can you bring it back to life?" "Go ahead and pop the hood," he said. "I'll get my jumper cables." Within minutes, Jack had her station wagon running. Addison left with a quick thank you and another smile. When Jack eventually strolled onto the tennis court, his partner grilled him for being late and wasting half their court time. To make things worse, it started to rain. Jack simply replied, "It was worth it." Click, click, click. Jack fervently typed away at his laptop, hoping email was the best way to approach Addison. His mind kept wandering back to their brief meeting in the parking lot. There was something different about her. She was obviously pretty, but there was something more, an X factor he couldn't place. Jack realized email wasn't going to work. He looked up her phone number, took a breath, and quickly dialed the number. His heart jumped into his throat when Addison picked up on the first ring. "Hello? Hi, Addison. It's, Jack, the tall, dark, handsome, humble guy who helped you with your car the other day." "I know who it is, and you forgot honest, meek, and modest," she replied with a quick rebuttal. He wasn't going to be shown up. "No, it's Jack," he pushed on. "You know, the guy who runs into burning buildings to save kittens." She giggled. "How could I forget the man who helped me get to my constitutional law class on time?" "Wow, a lawyer." "Not yet, but maybe in a couple years," she said. "So how are you?" "I'm well, thanks. I'm calling to see if you'd want to play some tennis. I saw the rackets in your car, and I'm always looking for someone to play with." "Are you sure? I'm just a beginner." He wondered if she was politely shooting him down or if she was simply being humble. "I just need to get out and hit with someone to get a little exercise," he said. A truthful answer from a particular point of view. There was a pause long enough for 3 or 4 knots to tighten in Jack's stomach before Addison finally said, "Sure." Click. Jack tapped the pen against the table nervously. Click, click, click. He was at his thinking table in his favorite pub, which overlooked the town's inner harbor, the same table he always occupied when he wrote his columns. He was usually alone with a cup of Earl Grey tea. This particular day he had the tea, but he wasn't alone. Addison sat across from him with a half-empty latte and a law school book open in front of her. She looked up and smiled. "Tap that pen one more time, Jack, and I'm going to use it to write all over that pretty face of yours." "Huh? Oh, sorry," he said, running his hand through his dark hair. "I'm just working on a column and can't get started." "What's it on?" "How hand-scraped wood floors are all the rage in the design world today. Blah, blah." "I can leave if you want some privacy, and we can meet up at the tennis court later if you want." "No," Jack blurted out almost too quickly. What I mean is, well..." "What?" she asked, quietly closing her book. It had been a fun month of playing tennis and becoming friends, but that was the problem. Each time they parted like two friends, without so much as a handshake. Jack couldn't take it any longer. He had to know if Addison was interested in being more than just his friend. "Give me a second," he said, tearing off a new piece of scrap paper. He immediately began to draw a picture. "What are you doing?" He finished and turned the paper around to face Addison. "Look close at this chart, and it will explain everything." "What am I looking at?" she said. "Well, it's a line graph showing the amount of times we've played tennis. You can see There have been no less than 8 times we've played over the past month. Okay, is this another one of your dorky jokes? Maybe, he grinned, but stay with me for a minute. On this next line of the graph, you'll see another scale. This line correlates our tennis matches with the chances of, well, you know. No, I don't know, she said with a curious smile. Well, before you kiss me, he said, coughing in his hand. Addison looked down at the very accurate graph, clearly embarrassed. Eternity passed as Jack waited for a response. He quickly realized that if she wasn't interested in being more than friends, he may have just scared her off altogether. Addison giggled nervously. You get big points for creativity and originality. What did she mean by creativity and originality, he thought. Those were neutral statements at best. Jack felt completely naked and embarrassed. He scrambled and doubled down on the bet. You know, right now we're as close to 100% as it gets, he said. After a few more nights of just tennis and hanging out, then we move away from romance and sprint towards BFF-only land. And to be honest, I'm worried for you if this happens. Addison shrugged her shoulders and smiled with a flirtatious raised eyebrow expression. Oh, and why is that? Because you'd have let the man of your dreams get away, he said with a cheesy grin. That line is so bad, she said. I know. Have you actually used that line before? No. And probably never will again, he said, his shoulders starting to sag. It'll do, she said nervously. Jack's heartbeat increased tenfold. So, here we are. So here we are, she repeated. He leaned across the table to touch her hand for the first time. It was soft and warm, the way he expected. A moment later, Addison interlocked her fingers with his and guided him over to her side of the booth. She leaned in to kiss him, but suddenly stopped and smiled. So why do I have to kiss you first? Jack grinned. Because I'm old-fashioned? Addison laughed. So am I. Looks like we're at a standoff. She started to back away, keeping the flirtatious grin. No, wait, he said, frantically thinking of another line. How about on 3, okay? Seriously, you want to do this in tandem on the count of 3, like we're 7 years old. Yeah, he said, and after this I'm going to take you to see my G.I. Joe collection, so don't make fun, all right? She shook her head and rolled her eyes. Just count, please. Jack could see she was starting to blush and decided to hurry up. 1, 2, 3. Addison's lips tasted like mint from her lip gloss. Jack would remember this moment for the rest of his life. There was no tennis that night. Instead, Jack and Addison walked hand in hand down West Beach. The warm, salt air fueled dozens of multicolored sailboats racing by just offshore. Jack knew every sailboat out there was worth a small fortune, but he was the richest man in the world at that moment. Later that night, Jack kissed Addison in front of her apartment. Wanting to leave on a good note, he forced himself to pull away. Before letting go, Addison asked if he would call her the next day. He smiled, kissed her one final time, and whispered, "Of course." As he walked back to his Jeep, Jack figured out why Addison was so different from girls he dated in the past. The X factor was simple. Addison was the woman he was to marry. Click. The camera flashed as Jack and Addison's intertwined hands cut the white cake. Click. Addison shut off the lamp next to the bed and slid closer to her new husband. Click. Jack reached the bathroom door a second after the bolt was locked. "Honey, please unlock the door," he huffed. A muffled voice from behind the door responded, "Not unless you tell me why you had that painful look on your face." "You just caught me by surprise, sweetie. You know I have no problem." Jack took a deep breath and swallowed before continuing. "If your mother moves in with us?" The door clicked again as Addison unbolted the lock. It creaked open. "You mean it?" He forced a goofy grin. Yeah, come on. We can watch Wheel of Fortune like every night together." It got the response he wanted, a smile and the giggle he loved. "Thank you, sweetie." She paused for a moment before adding, "I don't know why I'm so emotional lately." Click. Someone snapped their fingers in Jack's ear again. Click. "Jack, wake up." Jack shook the cobwebs from his head. "What happened?" "You passed out, son," the doctor said, helping him into a leather chair. "It happens from time to time." Jack looked over at a fuzzy picture of his wife lying in bed next to him, holding something in a blanket. "Addison?" "I'm fine, honey," Addison said. "She's perfect." "She?" he said, repeating the word back to her. It's a girl, he said, jumping up to smother Addison and his new daughter with kisses. Click. Ouch. Dad, are you okay? Jack sat on the ground, rubbing his knee. I'm fine, sweetie. Something just popped in your old man's knee. Go practice your serves in the next court while I stretch out a bit. Are you sure? Don't worry, I'm fine. You got a big match tomorrow. Addison entered the tennis courts a few minutes later to find her husband giving instructions to their daughter from a seated position on the asphalt. Watch that left foot, Autumn, Jack said, turning from his daughter towards his wife. Afternoon, counselor. Honey, are you okay? Addison said, bending down to Jack's level. Jack smiled and replied in a loud whisper, No, I'm not. I need ice, aspirin, and some sports rub, please. He laughed and shook his head. When did I get old? Addison helped him up and kissed her aging lover's gray beard before easing him over to a nearby bench. They sat hand in hand, watching their 12-year-old daughter crush tennis serves a few feet away. She gets her athletic ability from you, Addison said. Maybe, but she gets her beauty and her brains from her mother, Jack had countered. Addison laid her head on Jack's shoulder. I love you. Love you too, he said, placing his arm around his wife and kissing her on the cheek. Autumn paused for a moment to look over at her parents cuddling. Yuck, she giggled the same way her mom did. An ocean breeze wandered in off the harbor just in time to take the edge off the late summer humidity. I want this moment to last forever, Jack whispered. Click, thump. The new noise brought Jack back to the present. The clicking noise of the oxygen was overtaken by the sound of the other machine, the one administering morphine into his veins. The building pain immediately eased. Outside it was raining, just like the day he met Addison, the day they got married, and the day Autumn was born. It took all his effort just to turn his head and look over at Addison sleeping in a leather chair next to his hospital bed. Once a lifetime ago, this scene was reversed. Jack was in the leather chair, and it was a joyous occasion. This time it was like a dark cloud overshadowed the sun. Addison stirred, adjusted herself, and immediately fell back asleep. Jack no longer saw his wife when he looked at her. He only saw the girl he first kissed decades earlier in the pub overlooking the harbor. The 24-year-old law student with hazy green eyes and a dimpled smile. Although gray permeated her hair now, Jack only noticed the handful of brown strands she tucked behind her ear. How long had Addison stood by him? 30 years or 30 minutes? It went by too fast. Earlier that day, Pastor Derek, a young man whose energy was only matched by his love for Jesus, visited Jack. Every Sunday, Jack and Addison enjoyed watching Derek preach about the kingdom of heaven and the redemptive power of Christ. But there were a handful of Sundays Jack watched Derek struggle to speak about things he'd not yet experienced. Many of the older parishioners took offense at sermons on age and dying from a 20-something preacher. Jack found it brave, but also something he pitied. He knew this boy had yet to feel the sting when the Lord takes those you love back home. Over time, Jack grew very fond of Derek and longed to surround him, his young wife, and their unborn child in a protective bubble. Jack's reason had a lot to do with Derek's wife, Autumn. During that visit, Derek had whispered in Jack's ear that the love he'd experienced in heaven would be far greater than the love he had known as a husband or father. Jack couldn't process this statement. More love than what he felt for his wife. He loved Addison more today than when they were newlyweds. More love than what he felt for Autumn. He often looked at her as a baby and broke down with tears, he loved her so much. Jack's mind continued to float towards eternity. If he could ask for one more undeserved gift, it would be to spend a little more time with these two previous blessings. He would dance one more time with Addison to their wedding song, and he would tuck a young version of his daughter into bed one final time as he read from her favorite book. Click. The door creaked open, and Derek slowly entered for the second time that day. This time he wore hospital scrubs. Addison stirred from her seat and immediately shushed him not to wake Jack. They both turned and saw Jack's open eyes staring back at them. It was too difficult for Jack to form words now. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken. Derek approached the bed and knelt down. Hi, Jack, he whispered excitedly. It's a boy, Grandpa. Derek choked up and started to cry. Autumn's fine and our son is healthy. I think God gave us the most beautiful baby in the world, Jack. He's in the infant ward just down the hall. You'll be so proud when you see him. Addison wept and hugged Derek before leaning over to kiss Jack's forehead. She buried her head in his cheek and whispered how much she loved him. Jack closed his eyes, trying to slow the cascading tears. Here he was, at the end of all things, and God was still blessing him with another undeserved gift. And Jack, Derek continued, I pray that our John will be a lot like the man he was named after. Jack? The clicking stopped. The rain had finally ended outside. Jack opened his eyes and the room was dark and empty. The blackouts and time lapses happened more now that he stopped eating. Jack breathed easier, and for the first time, he knew it was okay to let go. He didn't worry about Addison now that she had a baby, a new grandson, to help with the pain of slowly losing her husband. The door opened, and the light from the hallway shadowed a tall figure. Jack's eyes adjusted to the light as a person dressed in white slowly came into focus. He wondered if it was a new doctor coming to take more blood. The door closed a bit, and the figure moved closer. Jack, she whispered. The voice carried with it a lifetime of memories, which came rushing back in an instant. Was it the morphine making him hallucinate? Was it a dream? Did it matter? Jack wanted it to be real. How many decades had it been since he last heard this soothing voice? Mom, he finally said, choking on tears. Mommy? He repeated. I've waited for such a long time, honey, she said, slowly approaching his bed. She was younger than he was, the way she looked from his baby pictures, but even more beautiful. You can get up and come with me now, Jack. There are more of us waiting outside. I'm sick. I can't move. She bent down and kissed his forehead. Warmth immediately spread from his head to his limbs. Honey, you're not sick anymore. Jack looked down and noticed that he was dressed in white garments similar to his mother. Addison, Derek, Autumn, and the baby are okay, she said. You can let go now. There are no more tears, no more pain where we are going. You are home now, son. The end.